Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout, where today we're going to be taking a look at Fallout Antagonists, and we're going to be ranking them. I found this just looking through the Fallout tier lists, and I thought this was a really cool idea, because I haven't really talked about a whole lot of the antagonists. Sometimes we've talked about the main characters throughout the games, but not really the antagonists. So I believe this will include Fallout 1 through 4, as well as New Vegas, it looks like. I don't think we have tactics on here, although there would only be really like one notable villain there. So let's go through these. We also have our new categories up here. So we have ultimate villains. These I think are the best villains in the Fallout series. These don't really necessarily have to be villains, but they are very good characters and characters that can make really good villains. So I'm going to put them up there. Formidable foes up next, then average antagonists, the forgettable foes, and then the ineffective enemies. Enemies that just I don't find all that great. So let's begin with one of the most intimidating antagonists in Fallout, and that is Lanius. And Lanius is pretty awesome. He's got a really cool design. He is the right hand of Caesar, and he is a mean person. He is not nice. So Lanius is part of the Legion. He doesn't necessarily need to be an antagonist because you can side with the Legion, so in that case he would be a friend. With any other ending though, if you're not siding with the Legion, he is going to be pretty much the final boss of Fallout New Vegas. He's got a lot of health, he's got really cool armor, he's got pretty decent armor, and he's got the Blade of the East. Blade of the East that he wields deals really high damage. It also has a knockdown on it. He also has fire grenades when you try to fight him too, which is interesting. There's not a whole lot of backstory on Lanius. That's mostly because in Fallout New Vegas, a lot of the extra stories got cut. A lot of Legion content got cut for just making up for time for New Vegas to actually go out. So we don't actually get that much backstory on him. He did replace Joshua Graham, who was the original Legate of Caesar's Legion, and now he's pretty much the second in charge, and he is pretty much the most battle-hardened character in the Legion. So I think I'm going to put Lanius probably all the way up into formidable foe. Main reason why I wouldn't put him in ultimate villain is just simply that we don't really know very much about him. There's not a whole lot of backstory about him. There's just not a whole lot on him, and that was largely because a lot of the content got cut on the Legate's backstory and Legion's backstory. So unfortunately, they're not super fleshed out, and that's rather disappointing overall, because it would be really cool to see something like this, especially for somebody who has such an iconic design, a really cool voice, a really great voice actor too, and who is just so intimidating. He could easily be ultimate villain if he just had a little bit more. Then we have Mercer, which is kind of interesting. Mercer is in Fallout 3. Mercer is the guy who actually invites you to the pit, or who kind of pleads with you to go to the pit. This guy originally says that there is somebody that's taken over the pit that has enslaved a bunch of people, and that they are hoarding the cure from them. All of that is completely true. I guess we're also going to get into some spoilers here. I don't think Lanius being the main villain of Fallout, or the final antagonist of Fallout New Vegas, is really that much of a spoiler. Some of these other ones are going to be spoilers, like Mercer here, where Mercer actually used to be part of the Raiders. He was one of the Raiders that was in command, and he didn't tell you that going into the pit. He also didn't tell you what the cure was, which makes it so once you get to that point in the pit, suddenly there is no like good guy, bad guy situation. There is only bad guys. So everything becomes very morally gray when it gets there, which is the main reason why I love the pit so much in Fallout 3. Yes, it's rather short. There's not really a whole lot of replayability besides going back and collecting all of like the steel ingots and stuff, as well as it is probably the most buggy DLC in Fallout 3, but its story and characters are very solid. Mercer, I think, stands out pretty well. He is sort of an antagonist because you can side against him or you can side with him. He's definitely an underhanded guy. He is very scheming, very conniving. It does seem like he ultimately wants what's best for the pit's people, but he goes about it in such a questionable way that it does make Mercer stand out quite a bit. I think I'd actually put him in formidable foes too, because he is pretty interesting. He's nowhere near as intimidating as like Lanius is, but he does get a lot more backstory than Lanius does. And he's more of the scheming, backstabbing type of scary, rather than Lanius, who's just going to come up and kill you, right to your face. He won't have a problem doing that. Mercer will probably shoot you in the back. Then we have Aaron Kimball, which is kind of interesting. This is the president of the NCR, who again could be an antagonist if you side against the NCR in Fallout New Vegas. Most of the time, the NCR is actually fairly neutral towards you unless you are outright hostile towards them or you're wearing like Legion colors. Pretty much the only time this is going to be an antagonist, at least directly to you, is when you are with the Legion. Now, as the president of the NCR, he actually really doesn't do a whole lot. He only shows up for like one scene throughout the game. You could say that he represents the NCR like all throughout, but the one mission that you're on, you're just either trying to defend him or you're trying to assassinate him. One of the two, depending on who you've sided with. And for that, he just doesn't really come across as like that much of a villain, that much of an enemy. Again, if you want to say like the NCR as a whole as your enemy, I think that works out a little bit more. But I would put Aaron Campbell probably in the ineffective enemies, because he himself is not intimidating. He doesn't really do a whole lot, at least on screen. He just kind of shows up and then leaves, and that's it, regardless of who you side with. So you don't even really see him towards the end of the game anyway. Then we have the aliens from Fallout 3, and I guess this would be the alien captain, but we'll just call it the aliens as a whole, and I guess specifically Fallout 3, although the aliens have appeared in pretty much all the games. You can get the rare encounters in Fallout 1 and 2. There is the whole Mothership DLC in 3, which is where they're the most prominent. You have the crashed alien ship in Fallout 4, and you have the aliens in Fallout New Vegas if you took the Wild Wasteland perk, so they are throughout here. The aliens, I don't know how I feel about them, because in certain instances of the story, it seems like it's very much tied to them causing the Great War, which I don't really like. I don't think that that's a good thing to actually have, because there's just basically no backstory to the aliens. They are just aliens, they show up, they abduct people. And for them to have such a major significance story-wise to Fallout, where they are presumably the reason why the Great War started, or at least one of the potential ways that it started, I think this one is actually more confirmed by some of the devs than others, which is really disappointing. It just makes it feel like such a major event is just not as impactful once you kind of connect those dots. I feel like going with the story of like Vault-Tec starting the war makes a whole lot more sense, and it seems more fitting for humans to naturally just try to nuke everybody than just aliens showing up and then getting humans to nuke everybody on the planet. It's just like, it feels not very good, and they're not very intimidating either. A lot of the time, the aliens you can just bully in any of the games. Yes, they do have some of the best weapons, like the Alien Blaster is pretty much a top tier weapon in almost all the Fallout games, especially the early games. I'm going to put the Alien Captain in like the ineffective enemies. I don't really like the way that they're portrayed in the game. I don't think that they're as good. There's no personality to go off of with them anyway, because none of them speak English, none of them speak any sort of human language. They just babble on with their own language, which you don't even get some sort of translation for. The most you have in Fallout 3 is just picking up all of the little holotapes of people that have been abducted and have been interviewed or tortured by the aliens. And that doesn't really give you a big picture of what the aliens are really planning, what they do, or really anything about them. Then we have Benny. Benny's here. And Benny is a pretty great villain, I would say. He is very memorable. Benny is actually the guy who shoots you at the very start of Fallout New Vegas. He is the one who starts off the game. He's the one who steals the platinum chip for you. He's the one who puts you in the grave, and he's the one that you are after for unknown reasons, at least up until about halfway through New Vegas, where you find out how valuable that platinum chip actually is. And Benny is another scheming, conniving little weasel. He doesn't want to play fair at all. He wants to take over the strip. He wants to take over everything. And he is somewhat effective at that. He's not the brightest of villains, and nor is he that strong, or he's not intimidating whatsoever. He is going to try to stab you in the back at pretty much every chance that he absolutely gets. I would also probably put Benny up into the formidable foes, because I think he is better than a lot of the other villains here. And you can even kind of side with Benny too, at least signing with Yes Man, which I guess Yes Man's not up here. I guess because he's not an antagonist, he's always with you regardless of how you choose. So that does kind of make sense why he's not on the list. But Benny's a pretty great antagonist, I would say. And then we have Betty, who is in Fallout 3. You find her during the main campaign, or him once you figure out their true identity. So Betty is not who she seems. She is found inside of a pod that you get into where you're trying to look for your dad. She has pretty much trapped your dad inside of a dog's body, and you actually have to play a game with her which is not a very fun game, or at least it's not very fun for you, to actually get your dad out of there. At least that's one way you could do it. You can also trigger the Chinese soldiers to show up and just murder everybody and trap her in her own little Tranquility Lane area. So this starts out pretty simple, just playing pranks on people, and then it gets more extreme and more extreme until you become like the pint-sized slasher and are just actively killing people throughout the area. She is rather creepy, but I don't think she's one of the better villains. I would probably put her in the average antagonists. The mission itself is pretty cool and it's pretty memorable, and I do really like the secret code to it, especially since there's not really a whole lot of hints given. I really do like that you have to piece it together, and it's not like some of the puzzles that are found throughout the Fallout games where it's solve the puzzle and the answer is like right in front of you, or you have to move like one thing and there's your whole answer. I do actually really like the puzzle in here, so that's probably the best part of it. I don't think she's the best part of the area, though, that she's in, so I'm going to put her there. Caesar! Ooh, the leader of Caesar's Legion. He is pretty much insane at the point when you meet him in Fallout New Vegas, or at least getting there, thanks to his brain issues that he's having. And Caesar is pretty much the dictator of Arizona. He owns the majority of it. He owns the Legion. The Legion is pretty vicious to anybody that opposes them or anybody that they wish to conquer. They are a very violent group made up of a whole bunch of different tribes that have been conquered. Caesar and Joshua Graham were some of the founding members of the Legion. Joshua Graham is not here since he's not really an antagonist towards you in the Fallout games. And they built an entire army, took over an entire state, and are pushing onto the dam. And last time they lost the dam, but once you get to New Vegas, this is the second battle of Hoover Dam. Caesar himself is probably going to go up to the ultimate villains. Caesar is fairly interesting by himself. I still think he would be more interesting if we got more backstory to him and we got more expanded on him, because even though he is the figurehead of the Legion, he's just not given as much as you would think he should. Although you do get more information from him than from the president, so that's a big bonus. But it still feels like a lot of the Legion content got cut out of Fallout New Vegas just for time reasons. And it would have been a whole lot better to see a lot more fleshed out about Caesar himself and kind of his backstory, what he originally came from, and how he kind of got to where he was, as opposed to what we do get in New Vegas, where the legend of Caesar seems to kind of outshine himself throughout it, even though Caesar himself is still a really good character. So I'm going to put him up there. Then we got the Brain from Fallout 3, and yeah, I hate this one so much. Honestly, I don't know why Desmond isn't up here either. I don't actually even remember the Brain's name, nor am I going to go look him up. He's one of the most annoying parts. Him and Desmond both are some of the most annoying parts of Fallout 3 in general, and definitely the worst part of the Point Lookout DLC. And sadly, they were part of the main story, since you have to help out Desmond, who is just a whiny old man who wants to get revenge on this Brain, who also wants to get revenge on Desmond. And they're both unlikable. I end up killing both of them every time I play through because I just can't stand them. And it really sucks because the rest of Point Lookout is really cool. And if they had done more with the tribes or the main tribe in Point Lookout, it would have been so much better than focusing on these two. I guess it doesn't really make them forgettable, but it does make them ineffective enemies in my opinion. Because neither one of them is really that great of an antagonist. Neither one of them is all that exciting. They're just two old men that were trying to kill each other, or seemingly trying to kill each other before the war, and they've continued it all the way through the war and have failed at every attempt up till now. So usually I just kill them and leave them down in the hole that they should have died in years and years ago. Then we have Colonel Autumn. This is also from Fallout 3. Colonel Autumn is just kind of okay in my opinion. He is made to be somebody important throughout the Enclave, but honestly, he doesn't really do a whole lot. He kind of just shows up, acts like a jerk, and that's about it. He somehow doesn't die the first time when he gets knocked out, I guess, from the first incident at the Purifier, and then he shows up again a couple more times. He's not very likable. He's not very intimidating. He doesn't seem particularly smart. He seems like a lackey of the main leader of the Enclave. And he never really goes outside of those roles. He's just kind of a generic villain throughout Fallout 3. And why you would ever want to side with him, you can if you would like, but he's just so unlikable that you just wouldn't. So I'm going to put him into the average antagonist too. I think he's very okay as a villain. Then we got another very okay villain, which is Kellogg from Fallout 4, and he's probably also going to go up into the average antagonist. So Kellogg is the guy who shows up, shoots your spouse, steals your kid, and then apparently raises your kid, and then you just find him at some building later on. He has been cybernetically enhanced, which is kind of a cool concept, and it would have been better had it been fleshed out more with the Institute. He does kind of embody a whole lot of problems that are with the Institute itself in Fallout 4, and that is that they are just kind of evil for the sake of being evil, and their blanket statement is, you wouldn't understand why we're doing this. And it's like, okay, could you help me understand? And it's like, no, you wouldn't understand. It's like, okay, then you're just evil for no reason. That's not an interesting thing. Kellogg is probably the most interesting character from the Institute, and I'm still going to put him at average because that's about as good as they get, where he is at least somewhat of a bounty hunter or something along those lines, some sort of mercenary. The cybernetic upgrades are certainly an interesting aspect of him, and that's probably the most interesting part, is that the Institute could, genetically enhance people with the cybernetic upgrades, but he seems to be pretty much the only one that has them. Yeah, I know the Corsairs are supposed to have them, but by the time you're running into Corsairs in Fallout 4, you're just dumpstering them anyway. So, cybernetic upgrades or not, it doesn't seem all that great. Getting into his brain, you do get a little bit more, so he'd probably be better than Autumn, probably better than Betty, so I guess I'd put him at the very top of the average antagonists. But, yeah, that's probably it. I guess I should move Benny up, because Benny's better than Mercer, but not by that much, and I think these are fine. Then we have this guy. You know this guy. I don't know his name, nor am I going to look it up. I know who he is, though. This is the guy in the Operation Anchorage DLC from Fallout 3, where he just tries to backstab you to get the technology. That's pretty much his only purpose in Fallout 3, is for him to get gunned down towards the end. He doesn't trust you. You have, 2 interactions with him throughout the entire game. He is very, very forgettable. He fills the role of a villain that doesn't really need to be there. Then we have Dima. Dima is probably the best character in Fallout 4 in my opinion, because he is a very interesting character, and I really like the choices that he makes as well as the choices that you can make with him. So Dima comes off as being fairly likable and fairly open to a lot of suggestions when you first meet him in the Far Harbor DLC, but then you get into his memories and replaying them and how he has limited memory storage. And he's pretty okay with doing horrible things because he's basically a rogue AI. So for him, if the main solution that comes up, just kill somebody, would be the best solution, he's gonna do that. And then with him constantly making himself forget so he doesn't do things like that again, it makes sense with his limited brain capacity, I guess, limited memory that he has, that he would just default back to the same logic so that he could go through these things. Even if he knows that they're wrong, he can just forget them, and then they'll replay again. So Dima is really interesting and probably my favorite part of Fallout 4. So I'm going to put him all the way up in Ultimate Villains. I don't know if he's necessarily better or worse than Caesar, though. Then we have the Think Tank. And the Think Tank is kind of interesting. This is also in Fallout New Vegas. They are kind of the main villains of Big Mountain. When you first show up, they rip out your heart, brain, and spine and give you fake ones, turn you into a lobotomite. They also have caused a lot of issues throughout Big Mountain and the areas around Big Mountain, since they're the main reason why Night Stalkers exist and the main reason why Kazdors exist. So they made 2 of the more horrifying enemies in Fallout New Vegas, and they're just a bunch of mad scientists that don't realize that they've gone mad, pretty much. They like to do science experiments and pretty much put science above everything else, which causes issues, as you could imagine, because if you can justify doing anything for science, you're probably going to do anything for science, and that's going to cause a lot of problems. So these guys are pretty horrible overall, even though they don't really know it. I think I'm going to put them in average antagonists because I don't really know how to feel about them. Where they're not particularly average, they do stand out quite a bit, and you can side with them, but you can also understand why they're so dangerous for Fallout New Vegas, why they cause so many issues throughout the wasteland as a whole. Even though it's seemingly not intentional, it's more just out of ignorance and pride of making things that they cause a lot of issues. So they're probably the most harmful of the average antagonists that I have here. Probably even more harmful than a lot of the formidable foes up there, besides maybe Lanius. but I think I'm just going to keep them there. They're kind of a weird one to rank. An easy one to rank, though, is Dr. Mobius, and he's going to go all the way up into ultimate villains, even though I think Mobius isn't really that much of a villain. Mobius is another crazy old man that you meet in Old World Blues. He is painted as the antagonist of the DLC. He is going to be your main villain, and then when you show up and meet him, he doesn't recognize you, he doesn't remember ever speaking to you, and I just love the subversion of your expectations there upon meeting Mobius. I think it's one of the best parts of that DLC, where he just genuinely does not know who you are. He is just lost in his own mind, where he's just making up all sorts of things. He's already gone kind of crazy. He has a chemical addiction, where he's just taking a bunch of chems and tripping out really hard. So yeah, I mean, he even admits all this to you like within the first sentence of you. He is the one holding your brain, which, I mean, it's kind of nice that he held on to it. And his big reveal that he has for doing all the things that he's done in Old World Blues to just scare the think tank is just to scare them, to keep them there, because they are more dangerous than he is. And even though he's insane, he at least knows that he's insane, and they don't know that they're insane. So I think it just fits so well, and he's by far one of my favorite characters. I don't know really where else to put him, though, besides like ultimate villain, because he's definitely not average, he's definitely not forgettable. He's, I guess, technically ineffective as an enemy, because he is just a crazy old man. He's, for the most part, harmless, but he is a crazy old man in the end, and like, he does do a whole lot of things that I really enjoy. Dr. Mobius is absolutely one of my favorite antagonists throughout any of the Fallout series. Speaking of one of my favorite villains of any of the Fallout series, we also have Father Elijah. So Father Elijah used to be the Brotherhood leader. He was the elder of the Brotherhood chapter in Fallout New Vegas. Then he went insane, or even more insane than he already was, where he got into a big war with the NCR at Helios 1, which cost the Brotherhood a whole bunch of people that were killed, because he's basically looking for like super weapons, artifacts from the past that he can convert into crazy powerful things. Turns out the weapon that Helios 1 went to wasn't really all that effective, no more effective than like an artillery barrage would be. So, and you can only use it once per day outside. So it's not that great. He's made so many experiments. You can actually find references to this throughout the world as well, where upon finding the Sea Finder, you could actually find a dead person that had a collar strapped to them. So Elijah had gotten to this person, put an explosive collar on him, told him to go get this weapon and bring it back to him, and that's why the kid in Freeside actually has it. That's never actually explained in the game. It's just a very cool little detail that you can piece together. Elijah does this to a lot of people. He is the main antagonist of Dead Money, and he is a very terrifying villain. He is pretty much a genius throughout the wasteland, and he is very conniving, he's very smart, and he's very, very cruel towards anybody that opposes him. He's also just completely insane, where it's just, if he wants something, he's gonna try to get it, and it comes with some really interesting interactions, because he was in Old World Blues as well, and you can find the tapes between him and Christine, and then also Ulysses, all sort of talking with one another, where Christina's been tracking him down to try to kill him. He's been doing experiments there by putting bomb collars on people, creating his own weapons, blowing up the train. That's why the train can't go in and out of Old World Blues anymore, because he's been the one who's destroyed it and collapsed it. So he's also going to go up into the ultimate villain tier up here. Then we have General Oliver here. General Oliver is also with the NCR. You really only see him at the very end of the game, regardless of who you side with. Even if you side with the NCR, you barely talk to him. He doesn't really have a backstory. He's just the general of the NCR, so I'm going to put him in forgettable. I don't think he's as ineffective as the president, but he's just a step higher than that, which is still not saying very much. Then we have Mr. House. Mr. House is interesting as a villain too, or interesting as an antagonist, because he was the one who pretty much set up New Vegas. He owns the Lucky 38, he's been alive since before the war, and he also owns the Robco company, so he's made a bunch of the robots. He is not necessarily evil, but he's very much like a corporate overlord, where he wants to control everything, and he wants to get the most out of Vegas. He wants Vegas to be the most independent that it can be, so pretty much that he can rule over it to some extent. And he does a pretty good job at that. He's also the one who sent you to go get the platinum chip at the very start of Fallout New Vegas. You were the courier that was supposed to deliver it before Benny stole it from you. And Mr. House is definitely memorable. I don't know where I'd put him, though, because Mr. House is very scheming, he's very conniving. He's not intimidating at all, though, because, yeah, I mean, he's an old man in a tank. You can kill him very easily, or just lock him away forever in there. I mean, there's not really that much of an intimidation factor to him. Then again, there's not a whole lot of... There's, like, no intimidation factor of Dr. Mobius, so maybe that's not a great standard to go off of. I think I'd put Mr. House in the formidable foes, but I think I'd put him towards the very top. Then we have the Lieutenant from Fallout 2. And honestly, I don't remember anything about this guy in Fallout 2. I just have blanked on him entirely. So I'm going to put him in Forgettable Foes because I don't remember where he was at all. I believe he's an optional boss that you can fight in Fallout 2. I don't think he's necessary. I think he's at the Mariposa base, which is just filled with Enclave characters. And I don't really remember fighting him. So I'm going to put him there as Forgettable Foes. It's been a long time since I played Fallout 2, though. So maybe that's a reason why I don't really remember him. And then we have Morpheus. This is from Fallout 1. And I honestly don't remember him at all in Fallout 1. So he just got to go into the Forgettable Foes. Again, I haven't played Fallout 1 in quite a while. And I remember him being in the church that you go to towards the end. But that's about it. I know he has like a quest associated with him. I remember him being one of the villains in Fallout 1 that you kill. And then I'm pretty sure you burn his church down. So there's that. But I don't honestly remember that much about him. So I'm going to put him in Forgettable Foes for me, because I don't remember him at all. Then we have Frank Horrigan. Frank Horrigan is a pretty awesome villain. He is pretty much the main villain of Fallout 2. Well, I guess besides the next guy we need to talk about. Frank Horrigan is a super mutant that wears power armor that is a major character for the Enclave. He is a major player for the Enclave, where he's pretty much the second in command to the Enclave in Fallout 2, where they are arguably their strongest. He is a very big, very intimidating enemy where he's got a big old sword arm. He's got miniguns that he uses to rip people apart. He has, well, I mean, he is a super mutant, so he's obviously very big. He's a little bit bigger than regular super mutants, but not quite to like behemoth size. At least he doesn't seem so in Fallout 2. There's no scale to a behemoth in that one, but he doesn't seem quite that big, but larger than a regular super mutant. He's got the better FEV virus, where he's basically only got the pros to the super mutant thing, with the only con being that his skin has turned green. So he's bigger, he's stronger, he's tankier, he regenerates, and then they just strapped him with a metric ton of power armor on top of that. He is very scary. He also has a really cool voice, too. If you've never heard his voice, definitely look it up. Frank Horrigan is really awesome. The only kind of downside with Frank is that we don't necessarily get a whole lot of backstory with him within Fallout 2. There is quite a bit of lore on him, if you want to read into that, but not so much directly from the game. So there is kind of that. I think I'd still probably put Frank up into Ultimate Villain, though. I mean, he's definitely like the biggest, most intimidating of any of the characters here. I mean, a super jacked up super mutant in full power armor is probably the scariest thing, at least physically, in the Wasteland. So I feel like he belongs up there just for the intimidation that he has alone. And then we've got Dick Richardson here. He is the president of the Enclave in Fallout 2. So he is a pretty major character in Fallout 2. He's also pretty much the one who reveals why vaults were made and how vaults were kind of intended to be used, where either they were the control vaults, where they're basically just a regular vault, or they're the experiment vaults, where there was various experiments going on in them, sometimes horrifying ones. He was aware of all of this. The Enclave was aware of all of this because the way the Enclave wanted this to kind of play out for them was for them to get in their own vaults, to stay secure, to have the best everything in the Wasteland pretty much, and then once the Wasteland opened up, they could go outside and purge everything so that they could take over. That was the plan. That hasn't really worked out so well for them in the Fallout universe. They've kind of gotten blown up multiple times, so yeah, they're kind of 0 for 2 at least at the moment. I think they have more interaction in 76, but technically that takes place before Fallout 2 and Fallout 3, where they kind of get stomped on a bit. The president here himself is fine. He is a memorable villain, but he's probably going to go into the average antagonist. Again, somewhat similar to Autumn here, where he's unlikable, he's not particularly intimidating, he doesn't really do much in Fallout 2 besides give you some lore drops like that, where you kind of understand more about the Enclave and you understand more about the vaults. He's definitely not as intimidating as Frank, nor as memorable as Frank, but he's okay enough, so I'll put him there. Speaking of average antagonists, once again, we have Fallout 4, bringing us Elder Maxon. And Elder Maxon is the Elder of the Brotherhood chapter in Fallout 4. And this is probably the most change that the Brotherhood has had, to some extent, where they are more militaristic in Fallout 4 than they are in pretty much any of the others, besides maybe Tactics, where you could argue Tactics has a bit more militaristic Brotherhood in it as well. Fallout 1 and 2, they honestly don't really do a whole lot. The Brotherhood is not very involved in Fallout 1 and 2, which is kind of interesting since they're such a major, well-known faction throughout the Fallout universe. They've appeared in pretty much every Fallout game, but yeah, they didn't really get a whole lot of attention until Fallout Tactics and Fallout 3, and then again, they were a minor faction in Fallout New Vegas as well. And Maxon here, I just don't think is all that interesting. I kind of get where he's coming from, where he wants to kind of conquer parts of Boston, but I don't think he does it in a very effective way, nor is he a super memorable, like, antagonist. He can be an antagonist if you side against the Brotherhood, so that's why he's here, but I don't think he's really a well-written character overall in Fallout, so I'm going to put him in average antagonist. He's just not really one of my favorites. He does have a really cool outfit, though, so I will give him that. Then we got the girl who's in charge of the railroad. I don't really want to look up her name. I can't remember it right now. I really dislike her. She is very annoying. The railroad itself seems like a really stupid organization overall, at least with the characters that are in it. I like the idea of the railroad. I think it's really cool, and certain parts of it kind of make sense. Why there's no railroad plus Minutemen ending or combination doesn't make any sense to me. They're pretty much out there just trying to save synths, which is good in certain instances, at least when they're regular synths, and you know they're acting like normal people. Not so good once they're some more of the more violent or killing synths like the Institute has. So yeah, I mean, she's one of the major reasons why I don't like being with the railroad. I'm gonna put her with the brain. These two are like nearly equally as annoying to me. Because with her, you at least kind of want to side with her. Not necessarily for her ideals or anything, but just so you can get the ballistic weave and make any armor good in Fallout 4, because it's just better than anything else besides power armor. And then after that, I want nothing to do with the railroad, at least nothing to do with her. Some of the other parts of the railroad are fine, but not one of my favorites. Then we have the Mechanist in Fallout 4. I guess you could also include the Mechanist from Fallout 3 here too. They're technically different people, but they kind of serve the same role. Where these are people that have turned the Mechanist, which is like a comic book character that can make robots and they can help people. Help people in big quotations there. And then things kind of go wrong. They take it a little bit too far. They don't program the robots well enough. And the antagonists are fine villains, so I guess I'd probably put them in the average. They're not really antagonists, at least not towards you. They do kind of want to do something helpful towards the wasteland. That's kind of their goal, which makes them at least somewhat likable because of that. They're just going about it in an incorrect way. So they're kind of causing more harm than good, not necessarily like the think tank where they're causing a lot of harm for very little good. So I don't really find them to be like the most interesting of the antagonists, but they're fine. Then we have Father from Fallout 4, and Father is also going to go to the ineffective enemies. He is probably one of the most frustrating characters in the entire game because he is the leader of the Institute, and the Institute is just evil for the sake of being evil with vague reasons. There's pretty much no backstory to this. Also, major spoiler for Fallout 4 here, so if you don't know about this, this is Shawn, this is your son. It's a really dumb twist that they throw in there. It's not that shocking, given the fact that at the very start of the game, we see what happens where our spouse is shot, our son is taken away, and then we go back under. And that presumably means that this takes place much longer than it did before. Which I guess one thing that does kind of help with this is at least they didn't make your spouse a skeleton because of the amount of time that had passed. so that is something good. You could kind of explain that away with them being in the cryopod, which I actually like that there's that reasoning for it. But still, it's a very easy twist to see coming. It's not really all that surprising. I'm looking for my son. We've been hearing nothing about the Institute. We've been trying to track down this guy for the Institute. I wonder if our son is going to be the leader of the Institute or a major character in the Institute. You know, it's not super difficult to piece these things together, so Shawn is just not a good character in my opinion throughout Fallout 4. He's not the only reason, but I like to think of it being the reason why I basically never do the main story of Fallout 4. I just wander around aimlessly and then install mods and start up a new game. I've played all the way to the end of Fallout 4 a total of 1 time now. And even then, the game actually crashed and wouldn't let me actually get an ending, so I've never technically completed Fallout 4. Asher is the main villain, or the main antagonist, of Fallout 3's DLC, The Pit. He is the one who has been keeping the cure from the slaves. And Asher is definitely the best part of the Pit. He's going to go up into Ultimate Villains. I absolutely love Asher, mostly because he's not really a villain. He's a very interesting character where he used to be part of the Brotherhood, and they went to the Pit originally to save people, mostly to save the children that were there, so that they could take them back and then turn them pretty much into Brotherhood recruits, which was a far better fate than being stuck in the Pit, where there's all sorts of horrible things going on there. Things like torture, cannibalism, more so than anywhere else in the wasteland, gangs that are all over the place, just murder, murder, murder everywhere. And his daughter is actually the cure, which is why he's not willing to share that with the slaves, which is also one of the major reasons why Fallout 3, at least the Pit, has a really good story there and makes it so you are forced into a very difficult decision. Where do you want to side with the Raiders? And especially after learning Asher's backstory, where he was part of the Brotherhood, he got left there, and then he started trying to fight back so that he could pretty much organize an army there just so that he could survive. This is why he takes slaves, this is why he forces Raiders to fight for him, and this is why he pretty much crushes anybody in his way so that he can keep as many people safe, because this is pretty much the only way he can do it. Slaves to build stuff to make things more secure for the area, Raiders so that he can use them as soldiers. It makes a whole lot more sense than for Asher to be doing all the things that he's doing. And one thing I really like about Asher is actually when you very first meet him, at least after the pretty much the gladiator fights in the Pit, he actually says something that's pretty interesting, where the rest of the Raiders want to call the workers slaves. He doesn't like calling them slaves, he wants to call them workers, because a lot of the workers did become like Raiders now. They are soldiers to him. And that kind of gives them more hope to, you know, not be a slave every day, not do horrible things every day, at least have some way of advancing themselves. And that is really interesting for a character like this. It makes him a whole lot more likable, and it makes him a whole lot more human than a lot of other characters, where you could have just had Asher be a generic villain. He could just be the person that's, you know, running the Pit, and there really wouldn't be a whole lot to it. But adding this other layer makes him so much more interesting, and it makes that decision even harder whether you're going to side with him or against him, especially when he leaves, because it's like, okay, well, you don't even really get to fight him now. You just are either going to steal a man's kid, or you're going to side with him and then potentially go back on your word for the workers and kind of backstab them. I really, really enjoy that about Fallout 3, because it makes it such a hard choice, and it makes you feel horrible regardless of which choice you picked. So that's one of the reasons why I love Asher so much. Then moving to like the opposite end of Asher, we have the General Jigwe. This is the main guy that you fight at the very end of the simulation in Operation Anchorage. He's the Chinese general. He's got an electricity sword. He runs at you and tries to attack you. That's it. I'd probably put him in the top end of forgettable, because even though he's not necessarily forgettable, it's mostly just because of all the glitches that are around him. If you're unaware of the glitches in Fallout 3, specifically in the Operation Anchorage DLC, there's a lot of them where you can technically get weapons that are basically unbreakable from that DLC, as well as infinite ammo from that DLC. You can also kill a particular NPC in the DLC, steal his armor, put it on General here, run outside of the area, run back into the area, and he'll have that equipped, then steal his clothing, And you can also have that outside of the area where it's the best clothing in the game because it has like 25 armor on it and only weighs like 3. It's also unbreakable. The character himself isn't really memorable though. He's just another character in Fallout 3 that you gotta kill. He's the end of the simulation. Once you kill him, the simulation is over. So I'm going to put him in forgettable foes. But I'm going to put him at the top end because I do remember all these glitches that you can do with him. Then we've got the Master. The Master is the final villain of Fallout 1, and he is the leader of the super mutants. He commands all the super mutants, and he has formed pretty much the super mutant army in Fallout 1, which is pretty much the most powerful thing in the wasteland at that time. There's really nothing that can rival the Master and his army, but once the Master is killed, then the super mutants are no longer linked together. So they're not really working like a hive mind, even though they weren't necessarily working quite like a hive mind before. It's just something sort of similar, more like suggestions or commands that they sort of follow from the Master. This is also why a lot of the super mutants are kind of messed up, because once the Master died, it didn't really sit well with them, as well as combined with the fact that they had the FEV virus, which usually lowers their intelligence and can make them more prone to like violent outbursts. Having that, plus having your Master die and not really having a purpose in life, you can kind of see how that could drive some super mutants to be completely crazy. The Master himself is very memorable though, and I would probably put him up into Ultimate Villains because he does start off the Fallout series really well. He is very intimidating, he's very gross looking. They definitely chose a very gory body horror main villain for the start of Fallout, which is kind of surprising because they didn't really go that way with any of the other villains. Like, nobody else has body horror to this extent. The Master is definitely memorable for that, as well as he did start off everything in Fallout 1, which does have cascading effects across all of the Fallout series because of all the super mutants. They're in all of them, and it kind of makes sense that they're in all of them because they were pretty much the biggest, most powerful army for a while there. Then we got Salt Upon Wounds. Salt Upon Wounds is the main villain of the Honest Hearts DLC in Fallout New Vegas, and he's pretty much just a butcher. That's what he's known for. He kills people, he wants to be part of Caesar's Legion, and you get to interact with him a little bit. He's not really that great of a character. He does serve a good purpose for Joshua's character though, depending on how you want to handle it, because you can have Joshua pretty much fall back into his old ways, where he is violent. He is definitely the war chief then, and that's kind of a bad thing, because everything up to that point is leading towards Joshua's redemption. You can also have it to where you have Joshua kill him, but you have Joshua kill him in a regular fight, and that kind of evens Joshua out a little bit more, to where he's still a little bit more on that war leader path, I guess, but not as much, and kind of feels, or you can actually talk Joshua out of killing Salt Upon Wounds, and then you get more of a complete character arc with him, where he doesn't want to see anything like with the White Legs anymore. He wants them gone. The other major problem that you have with Salt Upon Wounds being the antagonist of Honest Hearts is you also have Joshua with you, and you know that in a fight, there's no way this guy is beating Joshua. Even in an unfair fight, this guy is not beating Joshua at all, so he does kind of lose intimidation just because of that. I mean, he works well as a piece for Joshua's character growth. He doesn't necessarily do much as a villain, so I'm going to put him as like an average antagonist. I think he's fine. He's okay. He fits the setting as a tribal war leader. That's okay. It's mostly the other stuff that comes with it, primarily with Joshua, that makes him a little bit more memorable. Then you have Ulysses. Ulysses is the antagonist of the Lonesome Road. This is pretty much the end of Fallout New Vegas, where he used to be with the Legion, but no longer is with them. He is obsessed with history. He'll definitely tell you about that. There is one annoying thing about Ulysses, even though he has a cool voice, and even though he does come up with some interesting dialogue. I know not everybody's a huge fan of it, because a lot of it seems like he's just blaming you for events that you had no part in. And that is true to a certain extent. He is a bit of a hypocrite when it comes to that. But I do think that some of his points still stand throughout the events that you talk to him in the Lonesome Road, or that he talks to you. He is interesting though, especially with a lot of his backstory, because we do get pretty much a full, complete picture of Ulysses throughout the game, and it's not directly told to you. It's told through messages that he's written, characters that he's spoken with. Pretty much everybody is aware of Ulysses throughout the entirety of New Vegas. Joshua knows of him, Caesar knows of him, which makes sense since they were both part of the Legion. Christine and Elijah know about him. We've seen him go throughout the Big Empty. He's pretty much played a part in almost all of Fallout as a whole, even though he's not really in it until the Lonesome Road, where he's been waiting for you, to where the two couriers can actually talk or fight or whatever you turn it into. And siding with Ulysses is probably for the best in my opinion, because that gets the most out of him, where you can really talk to him. He was also supposed to be an NPC that you could recruit as a companion if you went through the Lonesome Road in a certain way. So in certain aspects, he's not necessarily an antagonist towards you. He kind of is for the Lonesome Road, but it is kind of interesting how much he can kind of sway back and forth. So I do think Ulysses is probably going to go up into Ultimate Villain for me. I really enjoy him. I think he's one of my favorite characters in New Vegas. I do understand people not liking him because of the hypocrisy reasons. And their very final antagonist is John Henry Atom Machine, or whatever his name is. He is the president of the Enclave in Fallout 3. And he is kind of interesting. His Enclave bots are always around. He is a computer that the Enclave has apparently elected to become their president. It makes sense to me, I guess, compared to everybody else in the Enclave. He seems more reasonable than most. Upon knowing that he is a computer is a little bit interesting, although it's not necessarily a huge twist since you don't actually meet him up until that point. And the way the conversation goes makes it seem like he is the most reasonable of the Enclave, but even then, he's still not that reasonable, because it's just basically like, hey, take this virus, put it in here, and it'll kill all the mutants and ghouls and anybody affected by radiation, so it'll only be the Enclave and Vault Dwellers that are left. So, you know, pretty much finish the Enclave's plan that they had in Fallout 2 to take over everything. He's not really that great of a villain for that. I do like his voice actor, I do like his voice overall, and I do like the conversations that you do have with him, but they are very limited. So, again, he's probably going to go into the average antagonist for Fallout 3. I don't think he's one of the best, but I don't think he's terrible either. So, yeah, this is where I put all of the villains, at least these ones, in Fallout's history. There are still plenty of other ones here, like we don't have the Calculator on here, which is kind of interesting, although the Calculator we don't really know a whole lot about from Tactics. He's basically just another computer that wants to kill everything, so he would probably also go into average, because I don't really remember much about him besides him lobotomizing Early Army and taking over his body. That's about it. There's a bunch of minor villains throughout the Fallout games too that could have been included on this list, but I don't think they would really need to be. So tell me your thoughts on the Fallout antagonists down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on them. Where would you put these guys? And how do you feel about these different characters in Fallout? I think for the most part, Fallout actually has some pretty decent villains, at least the major ones that we get to be introduced to. I mean, especially like New Vegas, where most of them are up here in the top parts. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.